Back in the 1980s, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, video games were as you'd expect. Very simple entertainment that didn't last any longer than a couple hours. Yes, there were a handful of games that might take a month to get through, but those were very rare. And I mean, hey, it was the 80s. There were a lot of other amazing sources of entertainment, so who cares if Super Mario Bros. Only takes 2 hours to beat. But fast forward 40-something years and we have single-player games that take up to 50, if not 100 hours to finish. And this isn't really better or worse, it's all up to what you like at the end of the day. But today I'm going to be going over why I still prefer games that are under 20 hours, which is what I would consider to be a shorter game for today's standards. Be sure to let me know in the comments what length you prefer your games to be and why. So with that said, thanks to my channel members for supporting, make sure to subscribe so we can up those numbers, and let's jump right into the topic. First of all, let's discuss the topic of quality over quantity, which is a highly debated topic, especially with how expensive games have been lately. Let's say there's two games that are both $60. One has 50 hours worth of content and the other has 15. With that in mind, regardless of which game is better, most people would just always rather buy the game with 50 hours. And I understand why, but I just don't subscribe to this consumerism mindset that it has to take up a certain amount of my time for the game to be worth the money. At least to an extent. I can see the reason for outrage if a 2-hour game is being sold for 70 bucks. But still, I find it that most of the time when a game has 50 to 60 hours worth of stuff to do, it comes at the cost of the quality of the content itself. Example, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is an awesome video game no matter what, and it can take you hundreds of hours, but in regards to the side content, most of it just isn't worth it in my opinion. After all, with how much the game has to offer, it makes sense. I'm not expecting all the side content to be good. I mean, I'd rather eat the dirt sundae from SpongeBob than find all 900 Koroks. So, while Breath of the Wild's How Long to Beat page does say that you can spend hundreds of hours on it, I don't think that makes it a better value just because you can theoretically waste more of your time if you allow it to. And that's the thing with games that tend to be a lot shorter. They have great pacing where every second of it is designed to be entertaining. Meanwhile, a third of Red Dead Redemption 2 is just riding your horse. Don't get it twisted, I love that game, but I'm just pointing out that shorter games are better at maintaining a consistent gameplay flow. Now, the beauty of this is not everyone needs to feel the same way as me because you can spend your money on the types of games that you like. I personally am able to enjoy some longer runtime games. In fact, Japanese RPGs are pretty much my favorite genre at the moment, which that is a genre with iconically bad pacing, but I feel as though the industry hasn't been rewarding games that focus on the quality rather than the quantity. Games that give you an amazing experience without forcing you to dedicate months to it. For this reason, I'm glad that a game like Astrobot won Game of the Year last year. This is an 11-hour game according to How Long to Beat, but it's 11 hours of just fun. It's an absolute love letter of a game to any PlayStation fan out there because almost every PlayStation franchise is represented via tiny references. I think the industry is beginning to realize that you don't need to wow the journalists with 30 hours of hyper-realistic narrative-driven over-the-shoulder action games. Just make a fun traditional 3D platformer and it can win Game of the Year. But yeah, in regards to the quality over quantity debate, I lean pretty massively in the quality department. Of course, there is a such thing as a game that is too short. I mean, I myself would not pay $60 for a 2-hour game with no replayability, but I think somewhere between the 6 to 20 hour range with some decent optional collectibles, that would be something I could absolutely justify buying. As somebody with hundreds of games that I still need to play, I really just don't prefer games that have a ton of bloat in them, but that's just how I feel about it. One other thing that makes me enjoy shorter games more is the fact that I can just regularly get new experiences. As I said before, modern video games can take you months to complete each game, assuming you also have stuff going on other than just the game. But yeah, sometimes this lack of progress can be really boring. I don't want to be stuck on the same game for 3 months straight. I want to play a new game every 1 or 2 weeks, finish it up, close my thoughts on it, and then move on and find something new and refreshing. Now, Now there are some exceptions I can make, and there are games that I would love to just dedicate an entire month to. Sea of Stars was one of those games, being a 40 to 50 hour long Japanese RPG that I absolutely loved, but usually I'm just going to play 2 or 3 smaller games at once. That way I can flip between them depending on what I want to play at that specific time. So for example, maybe I'll play a 2D platformer alongside a RPG, and that gives me a decent variety while both games are still new to me. Recently I've been playing 3D platformers like Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong Bonanza. I'm super close to finishing Banjo-Kazooie, or at least I was until I accidentally deleted my 9-hour save file, but I already finished Donkey Kong Bonanza, meaning I'll get to move on to something new very soon. Now this type of gaming isn't for everyone, because playing through such a large amount of games can make the memories of each one a bit blurry. I mean, I finished 50 games last year. You think I remember Yoshi's Island DS? In case you haven't noticed, this is kinda just yet another comparison of quality over quantity. I'd rather play a ton of shorter games each year instead of playing through 4 or 5 absolutely huge games with thousands of hours of content in them. Realistically, I could just be addicted to the dopamine of seeing the credits roll in a game and then writing it off as completed on Backlogged. As somebody with OCD, it is so incredibly satisfying to play through and finish games. Being able to mark them as complete and then just stare at the list of completed games, I mean, that's my life's work right there. So yeah, you can definitely see why I prefer the games that are easier to finish. But just the variety of scenery too. I'm somebody that also plays games for the sake of learning about them. I want to fully absorb the experience and just have the knowledge and relatability to talk about these games to others. Out of all of the things there is in life to learn about, video games is probably in the bottom of the barrel, but for me, it's something I like, and that's why it's most fulfilling. Real quick, before we move on to the next topic, I want to briefly check out a wired PlayStation controller sent to me by Gamrombo. I like to review controllers on this channel, but you may have noticed, I usually stick to Xbox or Nintendo controllers. And that's because there just aren't that many interesting third-party PlayStation controllers out there. So that's why I was excited when somebody from Gamrombo sent me their wired LED controller specifically designed for modern PlayStation consoles. Wired controllers are my preferred way to play video games. Reason being, I like to eliminate any form of latency that might exist with wireless, so it's nice to finally get to check out a wired controller that will work on my PlayStation 5, but starting at $42.99 on Amazon, this controller is a bit pricey when you compare it to some other wired controllers from companies like 8BitDo and GameSir, but let's just go over the features before we decide if it's worth it or not. Let's begin with setting the controller up, which is fairly obvious. You just plug it into the USB port of your console or PC, and then once you're on the startup screen, you can just tap the P button like so, and now it's connected. So let's go over how I feel about this thing's buttons. Beginning with the standard 4, they're a lot more rounded and spherical feeling compared to the standard DualSense. Whether you like that is up to you. I personally don't think it makes a difference. Next are the analog sticks, and I gotta say, I've never felt analog sticks like this before. I actually really like them, and could definitely see these being pretty long lasting, at least for rubber standards. But functionality wise, the DualSense's thumbsticks are still a little bit better. The touchpad on this thing sticks out a bit more than it does on the standard DualSense, but it's because it's got nothing to hide. It's a perfectly serviceable touchpad with no issues. I mean, it's not like this is utilized that often in games anyway. The D-pad is interesting. I do think it could be a bit less stiff, but that's nitpicking. Otherwise, it feels nice and smushy. Then you've got your bumper buttons and trigger buttons, which I actually like more than the base DualSense. I love the grip texture they went with on the triggers, and the bumpers are very clicky and responsive. There's also a turbo button right here, and the way to use this is to hold any button and then press the turbo key right after, and do the same thing to turn it off. And then on the back, we've got a button that says set. This changes the LED effect when pressed, and wow, there are so many color options. Pretty much any color you can think of, plus a rainbow fade. But that's not all the set button can be used for, and this is where my favorite part about the controller comes in. It can also be used to set up the programmable back buttons, commonly referred to as bumpers. I've never really used these in games before, but there are plenty of people who do, and considering this is a feature that the standard DualSense controller does not have, this is the selling point of the entire thing. Hold the set button until the controller vibrates, press whichever button you want to copy to the back button, and then after the controller vibrates again, press the back button you want to map it to. Although sometimes it didn't work work properly for me due to the fact that you kind of have to do 3 motions perfectly to get it to work. That's kind of my issue with back buttons on controllers. It's always super complicated to set them up, and it still is with this thing. However, the fact that you can get this working on PlayStation without buying that $200 DualSense Pro is pretty valuable in its own right. The last thing I want to go over is the input response time, which unfortunately I can't notice a difference between this and the wireless DualSense. However, on PC, my response time was good, so maybe it just has to do with the refresh rate of my TV. I'm going to be giving this controller a 7.5 out of 10 because overall I think it's good. It may not have anything that's absolutely perfect about it, but there are reasons to own one as a PlayStation 5 owner, and if you don't care about the LED features, there is a model that's all black that's much cheaper, so you do have options with this one. Thank you to Gamrombo for sending me this, and back to the content. And next up, we're going to be talking about some of the different game design philosophies that show up when a game is a lot shorter. Naturally, shorter games have much more of a prioritization of the gameplay, because if they're aiming for a game to be only 10 or so hours long, these games do not have the time to include massive cutscenes and deep story moments. Instead, it's pretty much just constant fast-paced gameplay. I am really into these games, whether it's something more old school like Super Castlevania 4 from 1991, or Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, which literally just released. I still really like story games, but I just love games that can be finished in 1 or 2 days if they leave a great first impression on you. An example is Gravity Circuit. This is a game I played through a few months ago, and I actually finished it the same day that I started it. It only took me 5 hours, but it was 5 hours of non-stop side-scrolling perfection, and my opinion on it has remained the same. It was an absolute blast. Also, one other thing about games that are a lot shorter is that they have more pressure on them to remain perfect experiences, and that's because they're also easier to perfect since there's just way less runtime to fill in. An example of this is Portal, which is a nearly perfect video game, which is made expected by the fact that it's less than 3 hours long, but it's 3 hours of amazing puzzle solving with amazing pacing. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, there's so much content in this game that it's excusable for there to be a little bit of bad or mediocre content, but if a shorter game has the same amount of mediocre content, it's more detrimental to the experience because overall there's less content in total. Basically, to summarize, shorter games try to aim for being all around perfect experiences in terms of their gameplay, and of course, a great thing about shorter runtime games is how much better the pacing is. Pacing in general is something that I feel is very underrated. Nobody wants to play 10 hours of a game just to get to a part that's insanely boring, and then you question your life decisions as you ask yourself, should I just quit? Games that are longer typically go through some really different stages of the game, whereas shorter games basically always retain the same type of gameplay throughout. Shorter games are often designed to be more replayable too. For example, a game like Undertale can be beaten in less than 5 hours, but the game also has different routes you can try out that give you a new experience. One last thing I would like to talk about is making the games themselves. I'm sure you've noticed over the years that the prices to make these massive AAA games has been increasing year over year, and there are ways to fix that. I think we could all agree that bloat is at play here, but in a vacuum, shorter runtime games are actually much more sustainable as they're just much easier to develop and pay for. So yeah, these are the differences in design philosophy when it comes to shorter games versus longer games. Shorter games typically have better pacing, are more gameplay focused, better designed for replaying, and are easier to perfect. But longer games are typically more grand, more expensive to make, loaded with content, and have a lot more effort put into their storytelling. There's no correct or incorrect answer for which one you prefer, but I prefer the shorter games. Due to the topics of quality over quantity, finding new experiences, and just the differences in game design, I myself usually prefer games that are shorter in length. Of course, I will play any game that's premise interests me, but overall, my preferences lies with games that are gameplay first, with well thought out pacing. I do believe that as a whole, longer games do have higher ceilings to be the best games ever made, but shorter games consistently speak to what I enjoy about this art form. Let me know what you think, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Help me reach 100k because that has been my goal and we're inching closer and closer to it. I never take this channel for granted. Thank you all for being here, and hopefully I'll see you next time.